Hello, my name is Vince Bradley, and I'm talking about a recent game that I've played at the Knights Chess Club. This was the second Knights Chess Club Amateur Open. My opponent was Scott Trendell. There was a slight rating discrepancy of about 800 rating points or so. So obviously I was expected to win this game, but let's take a look at this, see if we can learn something from it. Every game you should be able to learn something from. I started off with my typical C4 English opening, and Scott played something that was somewhat unusual. I haven't seen it before. D6. D6 is not the move that I normally see. Normally, you expect to see something like E5 or possibly some sort of King's Indian setup or maybe a symmetrical. There's a lot of different ways to play against C4, and I was surprised to see D6. So I went ahead and played G3. I like to play the fianchetto variation on the English, and it seemed like it wasn't going to hurt me by playing it this way. I wasn't sure what kind of prep Scott had against the English, and so I wanted to see where he was going. Notice that neither of us have taken any serious control on the center here, but we've both had some impact here. I am planning on fianchettoing my bishop, and obviously that's to come. Scott then played c6. c6 also feels somewhat awkward. It does do a wonderful job of blunting the bishop that's about to come here. So obviously the bishop right now is biting on granite, as the phrase goes. So I went ahead and he played knight f6. And you can see that we're heading for some sort of King's Indian setup. And honestly, this probably wouldn't have been too bad for him if he had followed through and then castled. That probably would have been a nice, reasonable setup for him. He would have had a nice position, something kind of hard to crack, and we might have had a decent game. I played knight f6, and he brought the bishop out. I've seen a lot of players do this. You bring the bishop out, you put the queen here, and you plan to trade off the fianchetto bishop. And that's a nice idea, but it might feel a little premature. I'm not sure that this is where the bishop wants to end up, but I definitely know that I want to castle here. So maybe I'd want to plan on castling before I bring the bishop out. So this is actually the first novelty of the position. Everything else has been seen before, and I was surprised that the queen out here was the novelty, as this is such a prime target that I expected that if this position had been reached before, the queen would have been fairly natural to have been played there. Other moves that were considered and played at different points in time, knight c3, so very normal looking. Also h3, kicking the bishop. Also played, you've got moves like d4. I generally shy away from d4. I don't like to head for queen pawn openings, just because there's so much theory that you can have there, and I like to keep games in the territories that I'm comfortable with. d3 is another option that could have been played, and then b3 with the idea of fianchettoing the bishop on the long diagonal and having the double bishops there. So none of that happened. As I said, I did end up playing the queen to b3. He replied back queen b6, offering for the trade. The trade here obviously is good for me if he takes it, and bad if I take it. So neither of us go about taking it. I play the pawn up with the idea of giving my bishop a square to go to and possibly my knight. I'm not quite ready to castle yet. I'm just trying to tempt him into taking this piece. I'm letting it sit there for him. So he plays the pawn to e5. I still really want him to fianchetto this bishop, push this pawn, and get that castle. This feels like a really weak way to bring the bishop out, and doesn't feel like it's terribly effectual. It also makes a nice prime target right here that I can maybe eventually pick on, since the supporting pieces are all gone, and the only piece protecting it right now is that giant pawn of a bishop there. So I brought the bishop out, attacking the queen. The intent was that I expected him to capture here, where I could recapture and have a half-open file for my rook, and kind of save myself a tempo on developing. Um, he still did not like that idea, so he attacked the king, where obviously I can't castle out of check. So I develop a piece with the knight, blocking the check, and this threat is still here. This capture on b7 with this rook that is completely trapped and undeveloped. So that looks like a tasty rook. He goes ahead and plays e4, and the computer says the best move right here was actually to go ahead and grab that pawn and go for the rook now. But I felt that giving away material was questionable, and so I decided that I wanted to save my rook first, save my knight first, pulling it back, attack the pawn. I've got 3 pieces on it. He's got 1 on it, even though one of them is pinned. And so he pushes the pawn, finally realizing the threat. But as you can see, these pawns all side by side aren't doing any good protecting each other. And with this long bishop here, this is going to be a real dangerous situation, especially as this e5 pawn goes away, or e4 pawn goes away. So I continued. I grabbed the pawn, a pawn to pawn, and I recapture with the bishop. He finally gets his bishop out. He's ready to castle. Again, I don't love this square for the bishop. I really wanted it to go on this long diagonal. Look at all of this space here that's wide open. The bishop on g7 would have been working well against the knight here, and maybe eventually the b2 pawn. So I go ahead and castle at this point. I didn't see any good moves as a counter at this point to make it more difficult for him. And I brought the queen back. The intent here was that I had the idea of playing the knight here, where the pinned pawn wouldn't be able to capture. If he did decide to capture, I'd grab that, and so I'd go up the exchange, and that felt like a good idea to me. But I did not like the idea of winning the exchange and giving away this pawn here, because the bishop would have been able to grab it, and that felt like it would have been a little ineffectual. Because just going up the exchange and dropping the pawn back to him didn't feel like it quite enough that if I played and set it up a little bit, I might be able to get more. So at this point, he pulls the queen away, and I play b4 here with the idea that I'm going to push the pawn another square and get that same position that I wanted a moment ago, but without the loss of the pawn. Now, do notice that he's got 2 pieces on it, and I've got 2 pieces guarding it, so right now this pawn is protected sufficiently, but that's not going to stay that way. So he goes ahead and plays f5, f5. Doesn't seem like it does a whole lot other than weakening his king. It forces me to move, but doesn't do a great job. It's not a square I mind going to. It's really a square that the bishop belongs on. So this pawn move weakens the king. Sure, he can start trying to push his pawns, but I've got a lot of pawns and a lot of pieces here. It's going to be difficult for him to break in. On top of that, he's got these pieces over here that are really ineffectual. If you look at the idea of the development here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed, and I've got my king castled and my rook's connected, and he's got 1, 2, 3 here. Obviously, these aren't developed. So I still have a lead in development, even at this late stage in the game. And at this point, he goes ahead and plays a6. And this just immediately drops a pawn, and a pawn's a pawn, so I captured it quickly. Bishop f6 attacks this knight, and so I'm starting to lose hold on this e2 square. He's got 2 pieces on it, I've got 2 on it, but he's going to be able to take away one of these defenders. So that's the other way that you can try and overload a piece, is that if you can't add another attacker, what you can do is try and remove a defender. So that's a really well positioned piece there now. And notice that it's taken him 1, 2 moves to try and get this bishop here, and he's got this weird pawn structure right now. Like I said, I much would have preferred the idea that he would have fianchettoed shadowed, and he would have still had the bishop on this nice long diagonal, but his pawn structure would have been more conducive to protecting the king. I brought the rook over, and that was possibly a questionable move. I had the idea of pushing the pawn and trying to get this open file here, and try and get some control there. Maybe double recapture here, putting the rook on this square where it would make an impact on the queen, hoping for some tactics. He played rook out, and now he's actually got 3 pieces on this pawn, where I've only got the 2 protecting it, and one of them can be removed fairly easily. I played b5 as the plan was, pushing the pawn. He couldn't recapture here, obviously, because the bishop is still attacking the rook through the pawn. So he removes the defender. I recapture to maintain equality there, and he grabs the pawn. So he's returned. I've returned some of the material that I've gained. I'm still up a pawn, and positionally, I think my pieces are much more coordinated. I've still got a lead in development. Computer says that I've got at least a 2.5 advantage here, even though I've given back one of the 2 pawns that I've won. Obviously, I can't let him recapture the rook there, so I shift the rook, with the rook being attacked through. The rook is sufficiently protected by the queen. He recaptures on the b square. I capture back, and here he just blunders the game. Really, at this point, the game is over. Not that he had a whole lot of good other choices. So I finish off the game right here with queen to b3, attacking the king and winning the rook. He interposes, and so we'll just quickly move through the rest of these moves. Notice that I'm immediately getting rid of the other rook. When you're up material, it's the best idea that you can have is to remove the extra material on the board, because proportionally your advantage goes up as the pieces start coming off. So, gave away another pawn, but with the advantage that I've got, I'm just trying to put my pieces on good active squares. I picked up another pawn there. There's some threats that if he hadn't made the right moves, mate comes pretty quickly. And so you can see here the bishop's pinned to the queen, and this is really bad for him. He gives himself an out, but that's not much of an out, really. And so I pulled back, and one of the great masters used to say, pin it and win it, and there I was. It's pinned to the queen, and so now I attack it to win it. He trades more pieces, and honestly, this is just helping me by reducing the complexity of the position. The less pieces that are on the board, the easier it is for me. There's another mistake, allows me to get into the back row. I check, and actually I could have won faster than the way that I did. There was a forced mate coming up, but I saw a win and went with it. So much for tactics trainer. So I checked, I grabbed the pawn, and so, well, let's go ahead and look at the faster mate, bishop g8. I didn't like the idea. I considered bishop g8, but the idea is that he can start running away with his king. And so I attack here, check, he moves, I take the pawn with check, he can't move forward because the pawn has these 2 squares taken away. And so, as you can see right now, he's got very few squares he can go to. Attack, and there's your mate. So I didn't see that through. I was back here, I took the pawn, again trying to simplify the position. Fewer pieces on the board, the happier I'll be. Even if all of the pieces got traded off right now, I still have this wonderful outside pass pawn that would have, I think, won the game for me, even in this endgame. Because obviously, even if I don't have these pawns, this pawn is going to be a monster and with queen. So I finally take the last piece that he has, giving away the passed pawn over here. But at this point, I was fairly confident that I was going to have a mate in a couple of moves. Obviously, the mate threat is right here, and he tries to address it, but with just the overwhelming piece advantage, the mate was there. So Scott played a wonderful game against me, way above his level. He is, as I said, only a Class E player, and so to give me the game that he did, he was very thoughtful, and I appreciated the game. This was my first over-the-board game in several months. It was helpful to help knock off the rust and show some tactical awareness. So hopefully you enjoyed the game. Anything I missed, feel free to leave some comments.